Hey guys, so in this video we are going to be learning or reviewing rather your Unit 1 test study guide. So for this, if you're doing it on the PowerPoint, type or draw your answers on each slide. Alright, so let's first start with reviewing opposites. So the first one says find the opposite of 27. Remember, the opposite is going to be take the number that you have, like 27, and figure out what number is the same distance from 0 but in the opposite direction. So the opposite of 27 would be negative 27, because negative 27 is 27 spaces away from 0, and positive 27 is also 27 spaces away from 0 but in the opposite direction. So they are opposites of each other. For the next one, it says find the, now here it's not using words, it's just using symbols, find the opposite of 21. Or you could say find the opposite of negative 21. So if you've got negative 21, what would be the opposite of negative 21? That would be positive 21. Okay. For the next one, find the absolute value of negative 41. So if you were to write that out, it would look like, remember the bars for absolute value. And absolute value is the number's distance from 0. So how far is negative 41 from 0? It is 41 spaces away from 0. So the absolute value is 41. The very last one says find the opposite of the absolute value of 33. So if we start inside of our absolute value sign, what is the absolute value of 33? Well, that's positive 33. And then at the end, we're going to find the opposite of positive 33, which is negative 33. Okay, the next one, number 5, it says you owe $250 to a friend. Write an integer to represent this situation. Integers, remember, can be negative or positive. So if we're writing an integer to represent how much we owe, it is a negative 250. Okay, because they use that word integer, it is okay to make O, that word O, negative. For number 6, Matt has a bank account of negative $10. This means he owes the bank. So here, it's not asking for an integer. It's just saying, how much does this person owe? And when you're talking about owing money, like real life owing, you would say that person owes $10. Okay, so this is when you would use the absolute value of the number of negative 10 and say he owes $10. Again, when they ask for the integer, it's okay to make it negative. If they're not asking for the integer and they're just saying how much does he owe, that's when you would use the absolute value. All right, the next one down says 56 meters below sea level, represent this situation as an integer. So again, negatives are good here. So the answer for this one, if it's below sea level, would be negative, below sea level would be negative 56. Okay, for this next one, it wants us to order the values from least to greatest. We've got fractions and we've got decimals here. So remember, when you have a mixture of fractions and decimals, the best thing to do is to make them all into decimals because it's very easy to compare. So we need to just change this into a decimal and this into a decimal. I'm drawing my little cartwheel because I'm going to make them into improper fractions and then divide. So the first one, 3 times 3 is 9 plus 2 is, this is really just 11 over 3 as an improper fraction. And then the second one, 3 times 5 is 15 plus 3 is 18 over 5. So now we can just do long division. So 3 into 11. 3 goes into 11. 3 times 3 is 9. When we subtract, we get 2. Add your decimal, add your 0, and drop it down. 3 goes into 20 6 times. 3 times 6 is 18. Subtract, we get 2. Ooh, what do you notice? Okay, it's going to keep we're going to keep getting a 2 because 3 can only go into 26 times, which is 18. And when we subtract, we always get 2. So we're going to go ahead and stop there because 11 over 3 is really 3 and 66, repeating forever. So we're going to stop. Now let's divide 5 into 18. So how many times does 5 go into 18? 5 goes into 18 3 times. 3 times 5 is 15. Subtract, which gives us 3. Add a decimal, add a 0. 5 goes into 30 6 times. 6 times 5 is 30, and we're done. So we get over here just 3 and 6, and we're done. Okay, the other numbers that we had, right, which are here and here, I'm just going to rewrite below. So we have 3.61 and then 3.66. Now remember, when we're comparing decimals, we want them to all have the same amount of numbers behind the decimal place. So I'm going to add a 0 to this number that we divided here, because that would be the next number. Now, right now when I'm looking at these numbers in front of me, okay, I have two that are identical. Let's take a look at those a little bit more closely. So if I were to go through all my numbers and add one more digit to each of them. So for the first one, if this first one here, if I were to add another digit, since it's repeating, I have to add another 6. For the one below it, I would add a 0. For the one below it, I would add a 0. And for the one below it, I would add a 0, right? Because you can add as many zeros. You can add as many zeros after the decimal place, but since that top one is repeating, it has to repeat a 6 forever. So now when we look at comparing them, we are going from least to greatest, so our smallest value to our biggest value. So our smallest value is going to be this guy here, which, if I look back at my work, is going to be, it was originally this. So 3 3/5 would be my smallest. So I'm done with that one. My next smallest would be this one, which was originally written as 3.61 or 3 61/100. Done with that one. My next biggest is going to be this guy, which is written here. So, comma 3 66/100. And then my very last, my greatest one, I'm going to have to put them underneath at the bottom, is my first one, which was written like this. So I'm going to put 3 2/3. So that would be our numbers from least to greatest. All right, so now we're doing the same thing, but now instead of least to greatest, we're going from greatest to least. So let's take a look at the numbers that we have. I'm going to start off with simplifying with my absolute values, and then I'll start all my dividing and all of that stuff. So this first one, negative absolute value of negative 31/100, is really just going to be negative 31/100, because the absolute value of negative 31/100 is positive, and then the opposite of that is negative. So that's really just negative 31/100. The next one over is again a negative of an absolute, a negative or an opposite of a negative absolute value. So this is also just negative 3/10. Okay, because within the absolute value sign, you've got a negative which turns positive, and then the opposite of that would be negative. All right, now we need to look at making sure that we've got all of the same things, as in fractions and decimals. So we need to convert these last two into decimals to compare them nicely. So I need to divide, for this first one, 3 into 1. Okay, 3 goes into 1 0 times, but it can go into 10 3 times. We get 9. When we subtract, we get 1. Add a 0, drop a 0. Ooh, we get 10 again. We're going to get 3. So as you can see, it's going to start repeating. So this 1/3, negative 1/3, is really negative 0 point, right, there's a decimal right there, 3 repeating. And it is negative. The next one, we're going to do 5 into 2. So 5 goes into 2 0 times, but it goes into 24 times. 5 times 4 is 20, and we are done. So that last one is negative 0.4. Okay, so the three numbers that I'm looking at, I'm going to rewrite them all and stack them nicely so I can compare them. So I've got negative 31/100, negative 3/10, negative 3/10 repeating, and then negative 4/10. So remember, we need to have all the same numbers behind the decimal place. So we need at least 2. So if I'm looking at my second number here, I need to add another number behind the decimal, which would be a 0 because it's not repeating. For the next one down, that is a repeating decimal, so we need to add a 3 as my second number. And for the last one down, we need to add a 0. Now remember, when we are comparing negatives, the number that looks, or the number that appears to be the biggest, actually has the smallest value. So again, when you're working with all negatives, the one that appears to be bigger actually has a smaller value. So if we're talking about the one with the greatest value, that's going to be this guy here, 3/10, -3/10. And if we look back at our problem, that was this original number. So we're going to write it as the negative absolute value of -3/10, comma. Done with that guy. My next one would be my next number. It would be this guy here, which is -3/3100, and that was originally written like this. So my negative absolute value of -0.01 absolute value, comma. So we're done with that guy. My next number would be this guy here, which is my repeater. That one was originally written as -1/3, so -1/3. And then my last number, my smallest number here, is this guy, which was written as -2/5. Okay, and we are done. So that is our numbers in order from greatest to least, or greatest to smallest. All right, for this next one, we are plotting the rational numbers on the number line. So to do that, we first need to make them all comparable, right? We can't compare those right now because one of them's a fraction, so we need to change our 2/3 into a decimal. So we have to do 3 into 2. 3 can't go into 2, but it can go into 20 6 times. 6 times 3 is 18. When we subtract, we get 2. Add my 0, drop my 0. 3 into 20 again. Okay, we're starting to see that it's a repeating decimal again. So we are now going to be ordering 6/10. 6/10 repeating, so we can add another 6 there. And then we have 6/100. So I'm going to add a 0 to that top one. Now we need to kind of put some numbers on the number line here so that we can fill them in. Let's say that this tick mark is 0. I didn't draw that very well. This tick mark's a 0. Okay, and all the way here is a 1. So if we do that, right in the middle, in between 0 and 1 is going to be our half. And if we do it that way, then that means that each tick mark is going to represent a tenth. Oops, a tenth, I'm sorry. So this would be 1/10, 2/10, 3/10, 4/10, 5/10, 6/10, 7/10, 8/10, 9/10, and then 1 whole. So if we are putting them on the number line, let's start with our smallest number, which would be 6/100. So that's going to be less than 1/10. So 1/10 was that first tick mark to the right of the 0. So it doesn't have to be exact, but closer to the first number. Doesn't have to be perfect. This is roughly where our 6/10 would be. 6/100, I'm sorry. Now for, so it's this guy. Let's do our 6/10. So that's going to be this guy here, right? And then for our 2/3, which is 66/100, that's going to be in between our 6/10 and 7/10. So again, it does not have to be perfect. Right around here, and I'm going to put my original number, which is 2/3. All right, please make sure to watch the second video that we have posted, continuing to go over this study guide.